am Linda van Tilburg for National Security News, and with me is a former British senior military intelligence officer, Phil Ingram, and we're going to discuss what's next for Israel and Iran. Hi, Phil. Welcome to National Security News.
Hi, Linda. Lovely to be here.
So what is the future now? There seems to, are we back to a shadow war between Iran and Israel?
Well, I don't think so. I think it's just popped out of the news because there's so many other things happening globally. There's been a bit of reeling back of tension from the unprecedented Iranian attack of over 330 missiles, drones, and the lot against Israel. The first time Iran has directly attacked Israel, and then Israel's response with one or possibly two air-launched ballistic missiles attacking an Iranian air defense site that's very close to one of their nuclear sites, just sending a message that no matter how good you think you are, we can get through your air defense mechanisms, which is very clever. And that seems to have taken the tensions down. And we're finding that the Iranian-backed proxies are trying to work out what they're going to do. But in the last 24 hours, we've had the UK put out a video of them dropping precision-guided munitions onto sites inside Iraq that were potentially going to attack sites owned by Iranian-backed militias inside Iraq that were going to attack allies that are in there. We're seeing little bits and pieces going on elsewhere. We've had the UK's HMS Diamond shoot down a Houthi anti-ship ballistic missile again in the last few days. So what we're likely to see is the resetting of activity by those Iranian-backed militias that there are. But they're very careful because we have to remember this latest spat all started with the Israelis killing the regional head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and their Quds force, the man that was responsible for coordinating all of these little disparate groups in what they were doing in their activities against the international community and against Israel. And then Israel has reeled back a little bit politically. They've allowed this to reset. They were going to carry out further attacks into Gaza to try and clear the last elements of Hamas from their strongholds. They seem to have held back a little bit from that, but there are artillery strikes and airstrikes going in. They're just not hitting the press in the same sort of way because the press has been taken up with, in particular, Joe Biden's commitment of another $61 million to Ukraine. But you wrapped up in the package that was announced in that is another multi-billion-dollar aid package into Israel as well. And it's looking at the implications of that. And of course, you've got Donald Trump in court. So that sort of takes up the rest of the headline time. So I think the activity has eased off a little bit, but there's still lots going on. It's just the international news media has focused on something else for a bit.
So do you think diplomacy was successful to diffuse tensions a bit?
I think it's been very successful indeed. And, it's not just the military plan that's in there. It's the diplomatic effort that's going on behind closed doors as well to try and stop it. And Iran, I think, suddenly realized that after they fired all the missiles, they'd bitten off more than they could chew. And I think we're very nervous for a period of time. And Israel's response, I think they were planning an overwhelming response, but the pressure from the international community, in particular the Americans, but also UK and others, will have made Prime Minister Netanyahu sit back and think a little bit. Netanyahu's in a very difficult position. He relies on support from the West, the US in particular. He relies on continuing support from the wider EU, Germany probably second to the US, and he recognises the issues that there are with political polarisation happening outside. But he's got an extreme right-wing element to his government. And if that doesn't support him, if he doesn't appease that and his government falls, then he's likely to be back in court and there's a real potential for jail time. So he's trying to appease both sides off. And I think he's having real difficulty in doing that.
I've seen a report that Iran might be concealing the extent of the strikes of Israel. Is that also an attempt to de-escalate the crisis?
Oh, of course, Iran's trying to conceal the extent of the attacks. Iran doesn't want the Iranian people to know that Israel, with 2 missiles, without them being intercepted, managed to get through Iranian air defenses the whole way through to a very, very sensitive and one of the most protected towns and sites that Iran has got. And I think that's why Israel chose it. Whereas when Iran attacked Israel, with overwhelming weapons and using just about everything that they had from a sophisticated perspective in their arsenal, just about all of them were shot down. A few got through, but there was only one casualty. And the international community came together, and I think that sent a significant statement to Iran. And it wasn't just the UK, the US, France, Germany, etc. It also was the fact that Jordan got involved, that Saudi Arabia got involved somehow, and I've read reports that Iraq were involved as well. So that sort of cabal of Middle Eastern countries coming together with the West will have made Iran have to sit up and go, actually, we need to reset and have a little look at this. Of course, the information they're putting out, one of the things Iran is very good at, and one of the things the organization they back are very good at, is information operations. They know they can achieve an awful lot more in the information sphere, not just focused on domestic audiences, but international audiences. And Hamas are masters at that. They're giving the international community a masterclass in information operations. And that's why they are hurting Israel from a geopolitical perspective.
Yeah, I've also seen there was an Iranian threat to annihilate Israel if they try another major attack.
Yeah, but that's to the domestic audience, and that's when I talk about the domestic audience, I include the militias that Iran supports. So Hezbollah, the different groups in Iraq and Syria, Hamas, Houthis, and all the rest of it. They have to be seen to be putting these big, strong, threatening statements out. It's a very Soviet thing. You see Putin doing exactly the same when it comes to Ukraine. You see Lukashenko has just in the last few days threatened the West with nuclear annihilation because he's now got Russian nuclear weapons on his soil, and he's decided that therefore if they're on his soil he can use them. It's all rhetoric, and it's all information rhetoric aimed at primarily the domestic audience. The Iranian international reaction, they were hit by at least 2 Israeli air-launched ballistic missiles, and they haven't reacted, and that shows that it's all hot air. But we have to be careful, because relying on it to be hot air is not necessarily the healthiest of things to do.
And I also see the UK has imposed new sanctions on Iran's drone industry. So what are they targeting? What are they trying to do with it? And will they be successful?
Well, Iran's probably one of the most sanctioned countries in the world, and dual-use technologies are already heavily sanctioned. So will the UK's increase of sanctions against their drone companies have any effect? No, not really. But again, it's sending that political and that geopolitical message. Iran is supplying Russia with all of its drones, and I think this is where there's an interesting link that hasn't quite come out here. I think whenever there was the potential for massive escalation in the Middle East, after Iran's attack, and then the West, reining Israel back in again, the one person who's relying on benefiting from Iranian technology and weapons being provided to him is Vladimir Putin. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if Putin hadn't got onto the phone to the Grand Ayatollah and said, hey, look, stop. I don't want you starting a war where you're going to have to make sure your arms industry is doing nothing but feeding the Iranian military. I need you to keep supplying me stuff so I can continue my fight in Ukraine. And we've got that link there. And we've also got an Iranian North Korean and a North Korean Russian link, and then we've got China coming into it somewhere. So there's a an international circle of things that are going on here, and I think it's that as much as anything else that's suggested to Iran to just calm it down a little bit for the moment. It doesn't mean it's gone away, and I don't think it's gone away in any way, shape, or form. I can see it blowing up whenever people feel that will be useful at any stage of the future, because it will be so easy for them to light that proverbial blue touch paper again.
I think what NATO was worried about is the escalation of the Middle East crisis, and that they will be drawn into it. So has that been averted?
Well, I think that's been averted for the moment, and it's a worry for NATO. But I also think it's a worry, as I was hinting to, for Vladimir Putin and for Xi Jinping, because you look at Iran, you look at the control of the oil routes and the access to um, uh, fossil fuels and natural resources. Iran's key to what China's doing and China's continued development. It's getting some from Russia. That's where how Russia's generating a lot of its income, and a lot of that's going out through Iran. So any disruption to that would have an impact on what China's trying to do, but it would also have another massive impact on what Vladimir Putin's trying to do inside Ukraine, and it would open up a sort of second front for NATO, with NATO supporting Ukraine. Putin wants that to happen in a way that it keeps NATO heavily distracted, but not to the point where it then will stop any supply of weapons and and cash and everything else going back into the Russian economy, because that would cause him greater difficulties. So it's getting that balance. And maybe I'm giving our global leaders a little bit too much suggesting that they've got some form of sophisticated planning and control behind this. But I do think there's some, because it's a little bit, what's happening is a little bit too clever. And I do think there's more cooperation going on than necessarily we've properly debated about in the press. But Iran realizes that it can't win. And of course, we've got the nuclear angle. Iran hasn't quite got nuclear weapons yet. If it had, Israel would have attacked them. Israel, whilst it doesn't admit it's got it, the international community is pretty certain that Israel has got a number of nuclear weapons, and therefore Iran doesn't feel as if it's in a position to start an all-out war with Israel, whilst Israel's fighting on three fronts at the moment. In the north with Hezbollah, with Hamas in Gaza, and an internal security fight in the West Bank. The West Bank is very much of Israel's creation, but it's still a third front for them. So they wouldn't want to simulate Israel into going, we can't deal with this at the moment. We're going to deal with it, in a very nasty and very quick way, which Netanyahu, his extremist government and all the rest of it, could be of the mind to do that very quickly indeed.
Phil Ingram, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you very much indeed.